Welcome to Fear and Greed, the week ahead. I'm Sean Aylmer, and as always, at this time on a Monday morning, I'm joined by economist Stephen Koukoulas. You'll find him at thekouk.com, TheKouk.com, and on Twitter using the handle thekouk. Stephen, good morning.
Good morning, and what a week ahead we've got.
In fact, I think we're in the middle of a blockbuster fortnight.
We are indeed. That there's, last week we saw some really key information coming out on the economy, and this week there's, an array of news that will really sort of put in place just how strong or weak the economy is and whether inflation pressures are subsiding or not.
Okay, so let's quickly look at last week. We had the Reserve Bank Governor Phil Lowe before Senate estimates. We had monthly CPI figures. We had very weak building approval data. CapEx is definitely coming off. Building investment is coming off. We had house price data, which was strong. How do you wrap all that up?
Let's start with what the RBA governor was saying, because he's the one who pulls the trigger on interest rates or has the greatest influence on them. And look, I liked what he was saying. I listened to the whole Q&A of a couple of hours in front of the Senate, and he really articulated some of the issues that the RBA is confronting a lot better than actually comes in the written word when they put out their press releases each month. So he was able to sort of use the time to sort of, just give the underpinnings of what they're thinking. And the bottom line is that inflation is still too high, but the economy is slowing down. They're a little bit worried about wages growth because the labour market's tight. But at this stage, there's no evidence that wages are feeding unwelcomingly into inflation. So it was one of these ones where you ended the session and say, yep, it's sort of, in a way, there was nothing new, but it just emphasised, the critical things, slower growth versus, somewhat stubbornly high inflation.
Yeah, okay. What about the data from last week? Because, plenty of interest in that.
Well, it was mixed. As you sort of touched on, the building approvals numbers were dreadfully weak. We've got this real problem occurring in terms of not many houses being built, and we know that that's a problem when we've got such strong population growth. So when we saw the CoreLogic house price numbers come out, it showed a very chunky 1.2% month-on-month increase in Australia-wide house prices. Sydney was plus 1.8 for the month. So supply and demand are actually dominating this interest rate pressure that we've had from 11 consecutive hikes from May last year. That was sort of the mixed news there. And the CapEx numbers were okay. Yes, they sort of showed a 2.3% increase in business investment in the March quarter, but the outlook was a bit soggy. So, the story is continuing in overarching terms, the economy's moderating, probably not a recession. But things will feel like a recession, particularly if you're in sort of the dwelling construction side or the consumer side of the economy, where the weakness is most acute.
Okay, so a couple of lots of big stuff this week, but the two big ones really is the economic growth figures and the Reserve Bank board meeting tomorrow, of course. Let's start with interest rates. What do you reckon they'll do?
Oh, well, having been burnt last month, I think they're on hold. Even despite what the governor was saying about inflation being a little bit of a worry. And of course, the inflation numbers, I should have mentioned the monthly inflation numbers last week were a little higher than the market was thinking. So that probably feeds into the hawkish scenario. But the slower growth says to me that they can probably sit tight. And after they shocked us all a month ago, since then, apart from that monthly inflation number being a little elevated, we've actually had the unemployment rate ticking up, employment ticking down, retail spending being weak, being flat in nominal terms. And so we've got the news coming from the global economy that it's weak. We saw Germany confirmed in a recession. The US economy is slowing, and there's talk there that they're going to be pausing later this month in terms of the Fed funds rate. So the RBA would be prudent probably to sit tight. Then they know the economy is slowing, and what they don't want to do is hike too much too late in the cycle. And if it turns out that inflation's persistent, they can hike again in, July, August, or September. But for now, just taking that cautious approach might be the wise thing to do.
You said that the economy is moderating. This week we'll get figures for the March quarter in terms of economic growth. What do you think they'll be? And just explain when you talk about moderating what you're talking about. But let's start with the growth figures.
Yeah, GDP numbers are out for the March quarter. They're likely to show growth something around about 0.2 or 0.3%. So that's the amount of goods and services, the growth rate in the amount of goods and services that were produced in Australia in the March quarter compared with the December quarter. And that's things like people buying stuff in the retail sector. It's the mining output. It's business investment side. It's dwelling construction. It's consumption of services. So things like holiday travel, that's all part of GDP. And it's slowing from where we were over the previous 3 quarters. Now, the previous 3 quarters can be revised, but as they currently stand, they've gone from 0.9 to 0.7 to 0.5. So the slowdown's coming. So if we get a 0.3, that would be a nice arithmetic progression. And it'll just confirm that the economy's slowing. So that's what we're looking for in terms of GDP growth, that cooling in the economy that had to happen, frankly. We were growing too strongly. And if we get that sort of softer GDP result, it fits into the narrative that the RBA should be on hold when they meet tomorrow. And it fits with the narrative that inflation will come down because the economy's slowing down.
So where do you think we stand at this point? Not likely to have a recession and not likely to have too many rate rises. I think that's what comes out of this discussion.
Yes and yes. I think that's right. I don't think we're having a recession because sort of the business side of the economy is a bit more resilient. And while we consumers are the ones that are clearly the weakest link in terms of retail spending and, as we just mentioned, dwelling construction, these sorts of things, that's where the genuine weakness will be there. We could even be hearing chatter about a consumer recession or something like that. But the business side of the economy is doing okay. And while commodity prices are back down, don't forget the Aussie dollar, tracking at 65 cents or a little bit lower, is giving our exporters a huge competitive boost. So the export side of the economy is probably going to be more inclined to add to GDP through the course of this year rather than subtracting from GDP. So, you do all your addition to see whether we've got a high probability of recession, and the short answer is no.
Stephen, enjoy the week.
I will indeed. When too much information is never enough.
Exactly. That was economist Stephen Koukoulas, better known as The Kouk. You can find him at thekouk.com and follow him on Twitter using the handle The Kouk. I'm Sean Aylmer, and this is Fear and Greed, the week ahead.